Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1321st New Social Environment. I'm Magali, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Lucas Blalock and Julia Rommel. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Lucas Blalock is a photographer working at the intersection of new media and post-conceptual art. Exhibition highlights include An Enormous Oar at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, the 2019 Whitney Biennial, An Ocean of Images, 2015 New Photography at the Museum of Modern Art. Blalock is an assistant professor of photography at Bard College, a 2025 Guggenheim Fellow, and the author of Why Must the Mounted Messenger Be Mounted? Julia Rommel lives and works in Brooklyn. Solo exhibitions include Burnt Toast at the Standard in Oslo, Stables at Bureau, Two Italian, Six Lifeguards at the Aldrich Museum, or the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum in Connecticut, and many more. Her work is in the collections of MoMA, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Met, Hammer Museum, the Walker Art Center, among others. And our host today is Chloe Stagaman, a Brooklyn-based curator and writer. Since 2022, she has been the director of programs at the Brooklyn Rail, where she organizes the journal's weekday conversation series, The New Social Environment. And with that, I will hand it over to Chloe to get us started.
Thank you so much, Magali. I want to give a special shout out to Magali and to Joshua, who are the Rails Programs Associates and who make this program run so smoothly and generously each week with such care. And of course, thank you to the Rail team, who I'm so lucky to work with. Thank you to Gabrielle and Michael at Bureau for organizing this incredible show that we're going to talk about today and for their support of this conversation and all the preparation that preceded it, as well as Nicole Cack for a really brilliant written piece that accompanies this show. And thank you, of course, to Julia and Lucas, the stars of Hunks, which is on view at Bureau's Tribeca space until February 21st. So if you can, I really, really encourage you to get there before the end of the day on Saturday and to spend time with this exhibition, which brilliantly charts connections between Lucas and Julia's work in a way that's so illuminating and has left me at least much closer to their processes and their endeavors as artists. So let's jump right in. I want to share my screen so that everyone can see the show. Can everyone see the show in front of them? Amazing. Hunks features new works from each of you made in 2025. I wonder if you can start by telling us a bit about what about the works in this show feels like a continuation. I mean, there's varying modes of time in the studio. You know, what feels like a long stretch of syrupy time for you as an artist, and what feels like something that's just arisen in the practice in recent years. Maybe starting with you, Julia.
Sure. I mean, most simply, everything feels like a continuation. I've been working with this process of stretching and unstretching gesso pieces of linen from stretcher bars for I don't know, maybe 15 years now. And it it always feels like an expansion and contraction of the very first kind of like time I did that. So I'm just trying to find new compositions or new things that excite me within that way of working. And of course, things have shifted in this show, like when it all came together, does feel slightly new and different to me. I mean, I think even like, especially in working, knowing that I was going to be putting some of these paintings next to Lucas's photography, maybe like loosened me up a little bit, where I wasn't like, oh, how is each painting going to fit together, fit with each other? I could kind of be a bit more open. So I think that allowed for some kind of, I might say, wilder moves. Uh, but nothing feels like a total out of the blue shot to me.
I pulled up this work because I wonder if you can say a little bit more about your process and how a work like this one comes to be. This one more traditionally kind of brings the sides of an originally stretched linen to the front, so that it forms this really gorgeous grid that then has all of these exciting nodes of discovery. No line is quite perfect. And there's always these really beautiful moments where things pucker or things edge out from the center of the line. Um, you talk about when you first discovered this, not discovered this process, but came upon it in the studio. How has it developed as a continuation for you?
Yeah, this one really illustrates that, where if I had, early in the studio just kind of like wanted to destroy or remake a painting and unstretched it and discovered everything interesting that was going along the sides. This one was much more kind of like planned in the idea that I was going to do that. And not only did I stretch linen around like a panel with thin sides and a back, this piece of linen was actually stretched around a 20 by 20 by 80 like column, like a plywood column. Yeah, there you go. Pictures of it makes it a lot easier to show. I started having this way of working. This was sort of a kind of like deep pandemic project where I needed to expand my way of working. So instead of just stretching in the conventional way around panels or stretcher bars, I started stretching around these columns. And that's how these more like geometric kind of architectural like panels of gessoed surfaces are formed. And I like playing with them. I like kind of like moving paint along those little peaks. Like the vertical peaks that you're seeing in the one painting stapled to the wall were once the corners of that column, if that's not clear. And the raw linen is what was like tucked and not gessoed. Like once I sort of am wrapping those columns sort of like a present. So it's just a starting point for playing with color and opticality and using kind of like the real physicality of the linen and gesso against what kind of like optical physicality can be like messed with color. So that's in a large part what I was doing in that the big painting you were showing. But also I've got a lot of work in process around the studio, and say for that one painting, and maybe Chloe, we want to go back to that image of the painting. Yeah, that's perfect. The detail. Uh, I am also uh, cropping and collaging just as a way kind of like to simplify the way I bring colors together. This one became a lot of fun for me because I liked how my sort of very almost sloppy initial stapling of these pieces of linen created these lumpy shadows, and how the colors of the shadows played with the grays of the painting. Um, and the light gray strip that you see running across the top was also kind of like quickly stapled to initially be originally taken off. So there's a lot of play with collage that sort of comes as an initial kind of like attempt at efficiency, like how to move colors around. But the physicality of it often comes very much into play.
I want to talk about physicality as it relates to your photographs as well, Lucas, but maybe we can start with you answering that first question of what of your work exhibited in this show feels like a continuation of something you've been looking at versus what feels like it was newly discovered or something that's come on the scene relatively recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to kind of reiterate what Julia said, I'm not somebody who tends to go around very hard elbows in my practice. Like it's kind of been a slow evolution over time. But I think that in some ways, this body of work, so this picture, Cheesehead, which is on the screen now, is part of 6 pictures which are in the show, which are themselves part of 10 pictures, which kind of are a group of pictures that I've been thinking about through the idea of props. And so a prop being like an object that is somehow or the other sort of activated by a narrative action or by a character. And I think that that idea, which is kind of, not so far from things I've thought about before, or even talked about in the work before, but started to be an organizing principle in a new way. And where I think that previously the work was really kind of always stretching towards kind of the edge of what might count as a photograph. This work feels a little bit more centered, I guess. Like they feel a little bit more of like a distillation of some of that energy into a new group of things. Um, there's also something really new in the way they're being presented. These large prints are put directly on the wall and have a kind of long seam going down the center. They're printed in my studio on 2 sheets of paper and then kind of brought together. And then these smaller images are likewise kind of directly applied. Like previously, my work has always been kind of framed. And in that way, sort of, there's always been a kind of removal from the kinds of decisions that went into making the photograph, kind of then get put in a case. And in this show was the first time I really kind of decided to think about presentation as more of an elongation of the kind of thinking that was going on in the picture making. So I kind of ended up with these kind of wacky hardware store frames.
I really love the choice of the title props because I feel like, well, you define props really, that makes sense there, but it also creates this distance from the object that's really helpful in thinking about the structures innate to photography. Like when I think about the difference between a prop and a product and how a product is sold, a product is so marketed to us, it's supposed to get inside my head. It's for me, right? And there's so much about imagery that's pointed at me. Whereas a prop is innately makes me think of somebody else. It makes me think about some other story that's being told and some other thing that I'm supposed to be paying attention to. And I think that device is really interesting in the work and feels akin to what you're achieving with the images themselves. Do you want to say anything about that before we talk about perspective?
Sure. I mean, I love that read. I mean, I think I've for a long time thought about my work as kind of utilizing the situation of the commercial photo studio, which I think is really, unlike a painter's studio, which I think is a place to make art, a photography studio is really a place to make advertising. That I've always kind of used that situation with kind of all of the wrong parts. And I think that substitution you're talking about of props for product is a really kind of beautiful way to put that. But I don't think I'd quite gotten there myself.
I want to think about, in our preparation for this conversation, you talked about wanting to think about perspective and perspective space. With photography, you're working within an expected legibility on the part of the audience who, were so saturated with images and in photographs. And so there's sort of an innate language that the work is playing with and working against. But then there's also this kind of way of using Photoshop to reinsert space into a flattened photograph and think about space not just in real time in terms of the audience, in terms of the way we're approaching the work, but thinking about it in terms of the way the work is constructed. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about perspective and space and how you started to build out the photographs from back to front and think about them that way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I'm like, I think photography is like, in some ways really gets in its own way by being really kind of overly efficient. You know, it's like it's such a efficient sort of conveyor of things through time and space that we can kind of lose our deeper relationships to it. You know, like we kind of forget, I think, to think about our relationships to the our relationships between things in photographs back to our own bodies. We kind of, yeah, there's so much shorthand in photography that's collapsing. And photography is literally collapsing. It's literally taking a three-dimensional space and making it two-dimensional. So I've always been interested in how I might register that collapse. You know, like I'm not sure I can quite fight it, but by kind of making it apparent, I think it becomes active again instead of being this really passive kind of accepted norm, I guess. And I think that for me, space in photography are like one of the things we were talking about in the preamble to this conversation was I've always been really interested in this idea of surface and about where the photograph sort of starts. Like I came to making these pictures by thinking a lot about painting, and oftentimes the really kind of interesting surface of painting, which I think is like applies so much to Julia's work, is the front surface of the painting. You know, it's like the surface of mark making. It's the surface of the fold. It's really like kind of where a painting happens. And in photography, that's kind of reversed. Like photography is more like a container. So what's happening and where the action is taking place feels like it's kind of inside. And I'm really interested in like all my work with Photoshop over the years has been sort of invested in the idea of not having it take place on the surface. So not manipulating an image so much as kind of trying to get the kind of that thought to go sort of interact or be active within the kind of spatial model of photography, which means it's kind of happening to the objects instead of happening to the image.
Julia, I'm really curious about your thoughts on depth as well. I feel like going back to what Lucas was just saying, like how the frontality of painting allows for everything to sort of play out from the surface. I think your work always invites us inward. It always invites us closer to it. Like even though there's this experience of it from afar, I always just want to get right up next to it and see every staple and see every ridge line and see the details. And that goes with, then there's also the colors themselves, the way that they create a depth in their own way. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you think about depth.
Yeah, I mean, I love this topic and hearing Lucas talk about it because I really do feel like this is what like above everything makes the show like the combination of my and Lucas's work together because his work has has such a beautiful formal quality to it where there's always a consideration for space, and that's kind of what like I have to say, like, originally, like, drew me in where I was like, oh, these are beautiful works that have this depth to them and this like color combinations that's really like pushing back in space and indeed um like very painterly in its color combinations and messing with my sense of space. Like especially like that last uh photograph of the shoes that we were looking at of Lucas is how like there's both like an optical play between those two kind of strong fields of color, the green and the kind of mauve. And then like the idea of what is happening in that image, which is like we want to kind of comprehend that like something is flat and maybe something is a wall. And then a whole other kind of disorientation with the toothpicks being stitched along the surface. So a question of like, what is the surface within this image, as if we hadn't photographed it yet, and what is the surface as we're looking at this image in the gallery. And I think that very much kind of does relate to my work, in that there is the optical plays with color, and kind of like, say, like those reds pushing back and forward, which I'm very concerned with. And then the real space, like the fact that the staples on the surface and the peaks that are kind of hard to see in the image, but are peaks and shadows that you see there you can see a bit more that you can see in real life, just kind of do indeed mess with the view of the thing, and hopefully make you come closer and think about what exactly is happening as you look at a painting, which is pretty much always a three-dimensional object. And the fact that that painting is going to shift with the different kind of like light attached to it, and as you walk around it. Yeah, I like kind of having that tension at play.
I think you both work in this really productive way with potentials in the artwork. So like where like Julia in the case of this painting, you get to see and you get to see all the different ways it could have gone in addition to seeing where it is now. And here with the shoes, I can't tell if the toothpick area is like where the shoes are dancing to, if it's like, and even the mesh that sits on top of the mauve color, it kind of messes with the edge of the space. You can't really tell what the shoes are sitting on or really trust that they're sitting on a solid ground. So there's all these introductions with potentials that then make the sum of the work add up to more than just the original image of what you're seeing or the original painting and its colors and the hints of color beneath. Do you think of it that way? Do you think of the potentials as having a life in the work as much as anything else?
I mean, I think that's a beautiful, I like this idea of potentials. I mean, I was just thinking about listening to Julia talk. I was thinking about the way that we kind of both use like literalism as a foil, like we use these kind of expected or I don't know, like maybe the staple is a kind of literal foil. It's like it tells you so clearly where the surface is, that it is this, it is punctured, it is, whatever. And that kind of, I don't know, changes the temperature of the experience of looking at it, and maybe kind of allows for, I don't know, like the word I want to use, which is a weird word to use, is belief. But I feel like there's a like in my work, I think there's like veracity and belief and sort of relationality in photographs is always kind of front of my mind. And I think that one of the reasons I connect so much to Julia's paintings and love this combination so much is that I feel like at least for me, I feel like she's pulling out a very similar thing out of painting.
I like that idea of belief. I've actually been thinking about that since our show went up, where it's like, what are both of us, like an idea comes up about like manipulation. And this is totally not answering your question, Chloe, but just thinking about belief and like manipulation and how each of us are manipulating or not manipulating the viewer, and like what is that, where it's like, do the staples have to be like required? I would like in the talk we did in the gallery, I remember saying, which is true, like I would never put a staple unless it wasn't necessary. But if I did, and is that a lie? Like, or like, does that take away? Like, because we are making decisions at all points to play, and it's like, um, say if I make a painting and it's covered with drips, I either decide to leave those drips or cover them up with an opaque surface of paint. But if I intentionally make a drip, um, does that make the painting less believable than like is there a line that either of us could take where all of a sudden someone's not like trusting us or believing us anymore? And is that like, I'm not even saying that's like necessarily a bad or good thing, but in thinking about um your work, Lucas, and all of the kind of like um there's Photoshop, or there are lies in there, if you want to call them that. And in my work, there's like in every painting, you're deciding to like to mess with what you've already done. Um, and I guess it's just been something that's on my mind since the show has come up, like how much messing with things makes for a good or a bad work, or if that's even a relevant question at all, which it might not be. Like that might
Yeah.
not be determining, the truth of the work.
I mean, it brings something to mind for me. Like, I mean, I think that when I said that these works feel like they're kind of like a refinement, or like they don't feel like, I don't feel like I'm reaching out in quite the same way. So I do feel in a way like I'm like kind of in my bag. And I think that I don't know. I think about this thing that the sort of graphic novelist Chris Ware said up about Philip Guston, that Guston's kind of later cartoony paintings don't look the way the world looks, but they look the way the world feels. And I really like this idea, and I've thought a lot about it in relationship to my own work. Um, and think I'm kind of photographing the way maybe not the world feels, because that feels a little like too subjective to me, as I think about photography more as a kind of triangulation, as a thing we're all kind of agreeing on some level. But I do think that there's a like what I am photographing is much more relationality, or the potentials of relationality, than I am photographing like the truth, right? So if the truth gets in there, like, and maybe this is kind of what I meant about the staple, is like if the truth gets in there, it's part of the story. It's like part of what's going on. Like it's like the material fact of the thing is part of what is at stake, but it's only part of what's at stake. And it's not really, the hinge is not about whether it's the truth or not the truth. The hinge is kind of much more about like whether the relationship that's getting developed is a relationship you want to participate in or not.
Mhm.
Really like this conversation around truth and lies and like kind of that line. And I think you both have processes in the studio that have some form of regimen associated with them, or some form of rules. I hate to use that word, but rules exist and are broken, but they form this kind of baseline. How do you think rules relate to that idea at all, if at all, in the studio, in the way that you work, or in the way that you're trying to kind of um yeah, in relationship to those ideas?
I can say just a something about that, which is that I feel like through years and years of painting, some things so rarely work. Like they so rarely like end up being um something I want to keep around. So that would be the closest thing to a rule for me. So like if I am too like conscious or attentive in making a gesture. It's not that I have a rule that I can't do that, but it just so rarely is something that I want to like not cover up or have out in the world. Um, so so I'm looking for ways of working that are more that make me a bit more like mechanical and automatic. Um, just because I'm happier with those results than if I like am holding a paintbrush and looking at my hand applying paint to a canvas. Um, maybe that will change one day, but like for right now, it's the practice. I wouldn't call it a rule, but the practice is using all kind of like foils for making that mark, stretching these things, and only kind of like catching myself making a gesture because I think I'm doing something else. So uh, those are my rules, if anything.
Before you jump in, Lucas, I want to kind of frame the question a little bit further. I really like this idea of belief because I think that like moving into thinking about how you both are editors and like the mechanical aspect of the work as the, thinking about that foil relative to the foil of editing and writing and how those two go hand in hand. Like in my case, I was editing my writing too much, and my colleague told me to turn my screen brightness down when I write a first draft so that I can't see what I've written until it's over. And then when I bring the screen brightness back up, like then I can hack away at it. But I'm not doing any favors by hacking away while the ideas are working themselves onto the page. And I think there are moments in both of your practices where the screen brightness is down, where you kind of create obstacles to your own ability to kind of judge what's going on in the studio so that these delights and these encounters can happen. And then there are opportunities where you're both able to work in construction and build in moments of wonder as well. So I wonder about that and how those two things kind of coalesce, because I think belief is really entangled in that, a belief that those systems will kind of give way to something really delightful and interesting on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think, I mean, to touch on the rules idea for a second, I mean, I think the most productive rule that's been existed in my work is that I want them to be photographs, and that it's pretty easy to interrupt a photograph enough to for it not to be that anymore. So that's been a kind of threshold or membrane I've been trying to hold on to over the years, and sometimes more. Uh, Sometimes I've been more serious about than others, but it's something I keep coming back to. And what you're saying about the darkness on the screen, I definitely relate to. I think I really making for me is a process of trying to get outside of the outside of the part of me that wants to manage and control, you know? So I work really quickly, often both in the studio and in the computer. I'm really trying to kind of get my brain to pay attention to something else, or find, I mean, people talk about flow states and things, but I do think it's something like that. Like uh, I'm chasing an experience, and oftentimes I feel like the first viewer of the work as much as I feel like its maker. Exactly.
Yeah, I pretty much feel like you two sort of both said it all in your examples, or like the dark screen or the, I mean, and it's so kind of like ubiquitous where like it does seem productive to separate yourself. And then you know, only later be a judge of what has happened in the studio. I just think you both make there's more potential for making, and also you're a much better judge because like I make a huge mess in here and then I'm like can't be overly attached to any one thing that happens because you know there's a lot of paint. And I think that's just proven to be the best way of working. And I do like going back to belief, I have to really believe in that sometimes because it can often feel very frustrating and slow. Like I actually can feel very slow at times where I'm like, oh God, I'm wasting time. And then I have to remember that like I felt this way last year and it did like come together. And like things that like get covered up get revealed again. So I have to remember and believe that process has worked out.
In the case of your work, Julia, how do you avoid, or do you avoid kind of um, ever since thinking about, when you've started painting these gesso surfaces and they're already stretched, and then you take them off the stretchers and you reveal these undersides, how do you avoid over planning that process or overthinking what's going to be on the underside? Like, um, how do you keep things discoverable in that process and avoid the editor kind of coming in and trying to make it something else? Or is that a natural progression of the process and something that you continue to evolve with?
Right. It's sort of like both are true where it's so tricky and where I'll like show up every week and be like, oh, like how can I surprise myself when I know I can plan everything pretty carefully. Like I know what something is gonna look like if I'm stretching it and um but of course that can be very handy too, where I'm like, oh, I think it might look cool if I do this and this and this, and I can set up a system. But to add to what I still need, which is like finding surprises and having like these wild moments. I think that's why my work does keep shifting. Like it keeps getting bigger because like the bigger it is, like the harder it is to control. There are always ways to make things more out of your control. And so with scale, and then I think that's a part of why I've really like incorporated gesture more. I feel like each year it kind of comes in more and more because even though in a way, and when I say gesture, I guess I mean like me making a mark, um, like on the flat surface, as opposed to say what we're looking at now. You see gestures that are more from like the construction of the paint around the stretcher bars, but and making a big mess myself with gesture. I do have like the control of hand on linen, but I'm often so unfamiliar and kind of discontent with it for long enough that something something happens along the way that's unexpected. Like because it's again, it's kind of like it's slow and quite obviously and literally layered.
I want to talk about scale, but before we get there, Lucas, I would love to know how you balance editor versus creator throughout the various stages of your process. You take a studio photograph, and I imagine that between the studio photograph being taken in the studio and then it becoming something that you can work with and play with on a computer screen, it's like Mike TV and Willy Wonka, like in the in the space of the studio coming. Like, how do you avoid in that time um, thinking too much about where it could go, or especially because there are so many elements to the original studio photographs that are already quite playful and suggestive about where the edits could be, especially the patterns and the fabrics or the materials that sit in the grounding. And does that matter? I mean, do you have certain things that you try to avoid in that process, or do you kind of let things evolve as they do?
I mean, I definitely let things evolve as they do, but I mean, I'm with Julia again in the way that like it's slow and I make so many pictures that don't go anywhere. So instead of shooting one thing and kind of being really fixated on a single set of relationships, I'll shoot a number of things over the course of an afternoon. And in some ways, like by the time I get to the computer, which I often don't do uh, very promptly. I kind of let myself forget somewhat of what would be like the clever move the first time around, and there's sort of a process of rediscovery, I guess. Um, and it used to be I'm shooting some digital now, which is kind of the first time. But it used to be that I shot film, and so after I would shoot the pictures, and then I would have to take them to the lab, and then I would have to get them back from the lab, and then I'd have to scan them, and then so there was the whole kind of process that would slow this thing down. Um, but yeah, I think for me, it's just I rarely know exactly where like I don't really like when I'm behind the camera, I'm not really thinking about what might happen to the picture. Every once in a while, I'll shoot something in a way where I'm like, oh, maybe I need one of these. Maybe I need a photograph of this background without the thing in it or something like this. But um, I think for the most part, yeah, I just kind of I'm trying to relate to the object, and then when I see the pictures again, when I'm kind of opening them on the computer, I have a feeling of what I wanted. That's sometimes is there. I mean, half of the photographs in this exhibition don't have any real photoshopping going on in them, and so those kind of they were. All I could figure out how to do was subtract from them. So sometimes it just stops. And then sometimes there's an opportunity that feels still available, and in kind of feeling my own, I don't know, like maybe the word is disappointment at the initial relationship through the camera, I kind of just push on them and see if I can get them to do something else.
And I feel like scale for both of you becomes a way to think about feeling, obviously, and also to think about well, I'm curious if you think it has about how you think about the relationship the work has with an audience when it comes to scale too. But you both use scale in really exciting ways, both in the case of your photography, Lucas, like in at some times the scale of the object really indicates its use as something human, a human using it or working with it, or it being able to almost be carried off the wall and taken and done something with. Other times it's larger than life. Julia, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about scale and how you think about even just scale at the very end of the process and sort of build towards something, which is, not always the case with painting. Often the scale is sort of set out at the beginning. So how did you come to that process of thinking about scale?
Right, right. I mean, scale for me is kind of uh different for me as a painter than I think for a lot of other painters in that I crop my pieces really ruthlessly. So a painting can go from being, like 80 by 80 inches. I'd say this one with this one we're looking at was, and then I can just look at it and be like, no, that kind of like 20 by 24-inch section is what is the painting, and I will radically transform what it is. So because I'm just like looking for the exciting paintings in that way, often the decision around scale is not like a premeditated, I don't know, this is the feeling I need for the show or anything like that. It's more just like I'm trying to find um what feels exciting to me. But of course once the paintings are stretched and in the gallery, the different scale of things I'm very aware does such like a dramatically different thing, because the marks throughout my paintings are pretty much consistent in size. And the marks of kind of saying like in this smaller painting, you very much see like the physicality of the gesso and that diagonal line. And it becomes a bit more in play, I would say, and more of like um of a kind of like more object-like in a way, like more of a book or a an object that I kind of like desire to hold, um, as opposed to the big paintings. So the small paintings are very important to me for that reason. Yeah, as I continue to challenge myself with the big ones, the small ones, and they're kind of like uh their physicality are very important.
Yeah, and you can see that with the spaces that you've left at the corners of this one. Um, how did that come about? It's a really delightful moment when you're
I
looking.
mean, so much like that is truly like that this painting was stretched on a smaller stretcher bar, and I'd cut those corners so that I could wrap it around that stretcher bar without it being overly bulky. And then I unstretched it and I saw what part of it worked, and I was like, okay, so it doesn't have that corner, but that's okay. The stretcher bar can fill in. That's fine. And then it either works out or it doesn't. And yeah, I very much appreciate and feel lucky that I'm open to I don't know, it's like I have this extra tool that I can just crop things and they don't have to be perfect because of the way I've chosen to like make these paintings work. So I truly can't imagine having a painting practice where you couldn't like cut a painting in half at any time. It's just always available to me.
It's very photographic. I mean, Lucas, I think you said that photography is one of the only mediums where you scale last. And it is like, it really feels related to that, feels related to deciding the scale in that way. How do you think about scale, Lucas? How did you decide to scale the series at large and then also to scale for the show? Several of the works are very large and hung on the wall without the glass frames and accompaniments.
I mean, scale for me is I've one of my preoccupations for a long time with photography has been trying to get the viewer to think about the thing they're looking at physically, like through the hand or through the body. And so oftentimes I've either worked with a scale that really like kind of invites picking the thing up, like is like this scale. And I think that as I've gotten more and more interested in this bigger scale. Like when I first started thinking about making big pictures, when I would make a picture, especially of a small thing really large, they would kind of get billboard-like, like the space would really flatten out and they would kind of turn into like big signs. And that was frustrating for me. So I kind of have been trying to find opportunities to make some pictures larger and much larger than the scale of the objects that are photographed, um, that retain a real kind of like physical sculptural presence. And I really, when I started working with this work, I was really excited that was kind of working, that those were doing that. And to come back to something Julia mentioned earlier about the shoes picture, like these pictures are all kind of based on uh, like monochrome or really simple color relationships. Like there's like a really there are big color fields in all of the pictures, and that's something that like I think I'm starting to understand better in my work. I think earlier on, wanting to encourage like the feeling of the kind of photographicness or the incidental or the accidental in the work, I found myself really kind of I don't know, not inclined to do things that were kind of all over compositions. But I think that this is I'm really excited about this group of pictures, and I've got some more kind of behind it that are also kind of functioning this way, and it's allowing for scale in a really different way. That's been kind of exciting for me.
Well, going back to that idea of like taking the object off the wall, I feel like scale becomes so essential in relating both of your works back to the body, the audience's body as well as your body in the studio, manipulating the material and building something. And I couldn't, I mean, every work invoked the body in one way or another for me, at least. Like I felt like Julia in your paintings, at times I see stitches, at times I see, like various ridges or, scarring or things, in the body and the way that bodies like repair, but also the way my body related to the color in the work, the sounds that I imagine are going on in your studio with the staple gun. Like the work is really tactile at the same time that it is constantly firing out all of these indications of the noise that brought it together. And then also just the scale of the work envelops you. I read that you talked about like building tree forts as a kid, and it really I feel that. I feel like tree fort hospitality in the work. I feel this kind of envelopment of color and form and like a labor of creativity that is kind of unaffected by your judgment of yourself.
Oh yeah, that's nice. That's a really nice observation. Yeah, I mean, these works are just so physical to make. Um, so with the bigger ones and even the medium-sized ones, um, I have this whole experience in the studio of, like carrying something around that's really cumbersome and too heavy for me and stapling it and unstapling it. So it's interesting when I look at any of these works, I'm seeing like the history of my own kind of like maneuvering of these paintings. And like I have a hard time even like describing the process without like describing how I'm just like kind of like wrapping myself around them at all times. So always the big ones hold that for me. And I think with even like, I mean, this show has like say that red one and the install and the black one that's downstairs. I'm sort of challenging myself with more, I think what you might call medium-sized paintings, which um are sort of less intuitive decisions for me. I just kind of wanted to see how they would work um in the install. So that's more of a conscious decision than a intuitive body decision. It is more like the big ones, the biggest of them are more my go-to of like let's like create this whole environment that has both the physical depth and like yeah, like for me very much the paint that kind of like optically sits back is like kind of like entering into a space that goes kind of like deeper than the wall. With the kind of like if to get like romantic about it, that idea of like entering into like a tree fort or like diving into the water or something like that, that there is sort of that when a painting works, I feel like it has that element to it.
Yeah, you really feel that. I we didn't get a chance to talk really about titling. I know you've written often in the past, you've written long press releases to go with your exhibitions, and your writing is often, you know, it's beautiful. It really charts like a lot of the different things happening outside the studio or in the studio. And I know your relationship to titling your work and writing about it has changed, or to the narrative that you want to attach to the work. And I wonder if you can say anything about that as well.
What, I was just kind of becoming aware when we first started this talk that Lucas's photography in this show, you're saying it's like with the prop concept and kind of like it has more narrative than maybe your work has had before, where like with the idea of props and how props might be like indirectly lead to like a prop for something that is a product. Like I just tell this whole like story around that, and that like with the relationship of the work in this set, it feels more narrative than ever. It's just so interesting because I feel like the work for me in this show is less than narrative than ever. And I don't at all have it worked out like how that makes them relate or not relate. It's just kind of the first time I've had that realization. But yeah, whereas before my work was more minimal and I did feel very much that there was a whole like story connected to it, and that the works would kind of be finished when I had a title that kind of like spoke from the work and connected to something in my past. And for whatever reason, that I've kind of drifted away from that. And uh yeah, I don't feel like these works demand a narrative title as well, even though I'm still titling them. Like I'm just feeling less of a need for that. And maybe it's because they just kind of land in such different places in their kind of like form and composition. But yeah, I don't really have an explanation. I just know that that has happened. And I yeah, now I'm super curious about it in relation to Lucas's narrative, the narrative qualities in his work.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Lucas, the body is obviously a huge part of how you think about these photographs and how you think about how they relate to us, and both in the way you're exhibiting them, but also in the connections you're drawing. Like even in this, I loved this one. Just the way that I can imagine this tool being used to make the background, and how there's just this active relationship between this pierced metal at the back and this object that in the aftermath. And so I wonder, and that's really difficult to do with photography, especially given how inundated we are with images and how programmed we are to kind of tune them out within any context. And so how do you think about that in the studio? You know, what cues do you have or do you create for yourself to think about the body in the work?
I mean, I think it's just like I mean, it's a so there's a so the last show I did in New York was in 21 at Ava Press and Uber Space here. And that show was about an accident I'd had when I was a kid at Disney World, where I lost my thumb on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. And subsequently, my toe was taken off of my right foot and put on my hand. So this is my toe for my right foot. And this story is a story that I did not understand as central to the photographic work I was making for a long time after I started making that work. But eventually, I was at a party, and this is a lot of years ago now, talking to somebody who knew my work without knowing this story. And I started to tell this story, and I joked that it was kind of like the first bad Photoshop. And it kind of like rang a bell in my head, you know? And so I think and it's not kind of the only story or the only origin or the only reason I think about the body. There are actually like some other reasons that I think I'm really sort of preoccupied with those questions. Um, but I think that it's interesting to have had such a physical experience of the world, so many of the things that I would kind of count as the sort of central experiences of my life are very bodied. And I've chosen this medium that is very disembodied. And so I think that I can't help myself. I'm just kind of like, it's interesting to me that I chose photography to begin with, if these are my preoccupations. But I did, and I think, but in doing so, I've just been kind of trying to pull the camel through the eye of the needle kind of ever since.
You can feel that in the work. I know we need to turn to audience Q&A, but my last question is thoughts on the title, Hunks. I know you decided the title together. Tell us how you arrived at Hunks. I mean, it's perfect.
But we had a really extensive list, a long list. And I don't know, Hunks came towards the end, and I mean, going back to the body, the um the works together in the show felt very, very hunky for all the reasons. And also Lucas and I are clearly the hunks of the art world, right? So um, seemed obvious.
Thank you both so much for this conversation. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was such a wonderful conversation to listen to. For anyone in our audience, if you have a question for Lucas and Julia, there is a link in the chat where you can submit your question and we will turn to you next. We have a couple of questions. The first question is from Ricardo in the audience, and Ricardo is asking, considering how you two expose the material structures and scaffolds of your respective mediums, how do both of you think about the labor of image production in your work?
The labor of image production? I mean, I think I like I think from where I started from as an artist, like in the late like photography has changed so much in the last 15 years, but in the late aughts when I started this project, I think that the kind of labor that went into photographic images was really invisible for a lot of people. And that the sense that photographs were worked on or that many decisions, it's like there's this Kodak kind of advertising adage, which is you push the button, we do the rest, as if photography happens all at once and it takes no labor at all. And so I was really interested in foregrounding labor at that point. Um, Out here in like 2026 in a photographic world that's like so rife with tools and with Photoshop and now with AI, I'm not sure. I still feel committed to those core principles of that exposure, but I don't know how I'm doing it at this point.
Right. Labor is tricky. It's tricky to address. You can certainly do too much and you can certainly do too little. I feel like it is like the day-to-day work in the studio that is so like necessary and like I think gets both of us there. But there's a real danger of just labor for labor's sake, and especially in my work, um, that can be really counterproductive. Um, so getting a step back from that, I think is kind of like the most essential thing for me.
Thank you for those answers. The next question comes from an anonymous audience member who says, I love the intro text by Nicole. What was the collaboration process like on that text?
Well, we talked. We uh Lucas and I both spoke with Nicole individually before she wrote the text, and I think she did a lot of really amazing research. And yeah, we like just kept kind of like going back and forth with the conversation, and then she kind of we didn't edit it much or anything like that. She just really took her own like creativity and I totally agree. It was really informed me of a new way of looking at the work, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add. I love the text. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great addition to the show. We'd initially thought about doing this show as a three-person show, and it's interesting the way that, to me, the text ended up becoming a kind of third character in this show in a way that I've found really productive and wonderful.
So true.
Thank you for those answers. The next question is for you, Julia, and an audience member is wondering how you decide your colors.
Okay. Well, I usually have an idea from a painting I've made before or a drawing I've made about what might work color-wise with kind of like the experiment I want to take on with like the physicality of the piece. So it's not like color doesn't really come first. It's more like, okay, what colors will be best for this project? So the idea will start there. It never works out. And then I'm really just kind of like trial and error, pushing and pulling colors along until it either works or until I kill the thing. It's a real challenge for me. I would say like I'm not an artist who can like look at a painting on the wall and be like, oh, this needs to do these three things in terms of color and that I know the answer. It really has to be something that I try and I look at and I think I know whether it's good or bad, but I'm not super quick to know what will be good or bad. And that's why these paintings often end up having so many layers on them.
Thank you for that answer. And then the last question is for you, Lucas. An audience member is wondering how you arrive at the fabrics and materials that adorn the studio photographs.
Sure. I mean, I'm a magpie, like I just go out in the world and get stuff. I, I try not to, I like things to be able to kind of stay dormant for a while. So I try not to spend a ton of money on things. Like I try to buy things that are, or at least not in that part of the process. Like I kind of want to have an archive of stuff. I want to be able to dig through and look for things. Um, so yeah, I shopping really, it's really boring. But I do spend a lot of time like just wandering around, fabric stores, Salvation Armies, 99-cent shops, stuff like this, and just looking for things that are either really right on, that like really feel like they're already carrying a lot of like associative baggage with them, or they look like something that I have not seen before. And I'm like, whoa, what is that? And then like I feel like either of those qualities can really kind of I don't know, get me to buy some.
Thank you. And that concludes our Q&A. I'm going to hand the mic right back over to you, Lucas, to close us out with the reading.
Okay, cool. So this reading is I don't know, I haven't read out loud in a long time, so we'll see how this goes. But this is from Kaja Silverman's Flesh of My Flesh, which is a book that I haven't read in a long time, but was really important to me. And as I remember it, it's a book where Kaja Silverman sort of sets out to reimagine psychoanalysis as if it was about Orpheus instead of Oedipus. And one of her sort of key contentions in it is that we're kind of produced by each other, that it's in our conversations, it's in our kind of collaborations that we kind of become ourselves. It seemed like a really nice thing to think about for a two-person show. So I just picked a page of her introduction. In spite of the fact that it has been discredited by Russian formalism, Saussurian economics, or excuse me, semiotics, structuralism, post-structuralism, and most of the Frankfurt School writers, Analogy has also been embraced by an impressive group of latter writers and artists. Rilke, Salome, Warburg, Proust, Valery, Willem Jensen, Walter Benjamin, Merleau-Ponty, Agee, Barthes, Sebald, Jean-Luc Godard, Richter, Coleman, and Terrence Malick all privilege similarity above all other relationships. A number of these figures also think of it as a kind of flesh and see this ontological kinship as the starting point for another kind of human relationality. Analogy is lived on in this way because it is the structure of being, and it gleams with promise because it does indeed have the power to save us. But I do not mean to suggest that Jacques Lacan is wrong. Although we are linked to each other through reversible and ontologically equalizing similarities, these similarities have no social efficacy unless they are acknowledged, and there is something within us that does not want to provide such acknowledgement. As Lacan helps us to see, this resistant force is the desire awakened in us by the impossible to satisfy demand that humanism makes upon us, the demand to be an individual. Since this aspiration cannot be satisfied as long as there are other beings, it turns them into rivals and enemies. It also gives us a dystopic view of our own multiplicity. When we fail to coincide with the mirrors in which we seek to find ourselves, we feel as though we are falling to bits and pieces. Finitude is the most capacious and enabling of the attributes we share with others, because unlike the particular way in which each of us looks, thinks, walks, and speaks that connects us to a few other beings, it connects us to every other being. Since finitude marks the point where we end and others begin, spatially and temporally, it is also what makes room for them, and acknowledging these limits allows us to experience the expansiveness for which we yearn. Because it gives us a powerful sense of our own emplacement within a larger whole. Unfortunately, though, finitude is the most narcissistically injurious of all the qualities we share with others, and therefore the one we are most likely to see in them and deny in ourselves. Our refusal to acknowledge that we are limited beings has devastating and often fatal consequences for others. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. What a beautiful way to close us out. And thank you, Chloe and Julia as well. Thank you, Gabrielle Bureau, for their support preparing for today's event. I'd also like to thank the Marion Bolton Kippy Stroud Foundation and Seeger Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these weekday conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us next Tuesday at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Elaine Reichek and Elizabeth Buhey on the event of Backstitch at Hoffman Donahue. And as is Rail tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Julie and Lucas.
Thank you.
Julie.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you,
Thank
Chloe.
And thank you, Chloe.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank
Yeah,
you.
go see this show. 2 days left.
Yeah.
Come on by.
Go see. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.